March 6, 1944, 28,000 feet above Berlin, Germany. Major Heinz Baer craned his neck inside the cramped cockpit of his Focke-Wulf FW-190A8, scanning the sky through the armored glass canopy with growing disbelief. "Unmöglich," he transmitted to his wingman, his voice tight with confusion that bordered on panic. "They cannot be here, not this far." Through the crystal-clear winter air, he counted them. 12. No, 15, perhaps 20 American fighters, sleek silver aircraft with distinctive bubble canopies, circling lazily over the Reich capital as if they owned the sky. The veteran ace of Jagdgeschwader 1, holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves and swords, with 204 confirmed victories earned across 5 years of continuous combat, studied the enemy formation with a tactical mind struggling to accept an impossible reality. Below them, 658 American heavy bombers from the 8th Air Force were methodically destroying Berlin's Erkner ball-bearing plants, Daimler-Benz tank factories, and Bosch electrical works. The bombers he expected. Berlin had endured bombing raids for months. But the fighters circling above the bomber stream, 550 miles from their bases in England, showing no signs of fuel concern, no indication they would turn back, no behavior suggesting they were operating at maximum range. These fighters violated every intelligence assessment, every tactical assumption, every mathematical certainty the Luftwaffe possessed about the limits of single-engine fighter design. What Baer didn't know, what Luftwaffe intelligence hadn't comprehended, what General Major Adolf Galland and the entire German fighter command would discover only through brutal combat experience over the next 4 months, was that they were witnessing the arrival of the weapon that would systematically destroy the Luftwaffe's ability to defend German airspace. The sleek silver fighters weren't struggling at the edge of their range. They had fuel reserves for 30 minutes of combat. They carried 1,180 rounds of 50 caliber ammunition for their 6 machine guns, and they could outperform every German fighter in service above 25,000 feet. Within 8 weeks, these P-51 Mustangs would transform from dismissed curiosities, just another American fighter, adequate but unremarkable, into the most feared aircraft in German skies. The mathematics of destruction were already loaded in those long wings. Combat radius exceeding 750 miles, top speed of 437 mph, 25,000 feet. Rate of climb matching the Bf-109G, range capability that made deep penetration missions routine rather than suicidal. The transformation had begun in April 1940 in a London office, but the consequences would be written in the winter sky above Berlin as German pilots learned that every assumption they held about fighter limitations was catastrophically wrong. The radio crackled with Unteroffizier Wilhelm Unger's voice, high-pitched with fear. The rookie pilot on his 3rd mission had just spotted the American formation. "Achtung! Enemy fighters directly above us. They are..." The transmission ended in a burst of static as 6 50 caliber machine guns converged on Unger's Messerschmitt Bf-109 G6 from 400 yards, the combined firepower delivering 100 rounds per second into the German fighter's fuselage. Baer watched the Bf-109 disintegrate, its right wing separating from the aircraft in a cascade of shredded aluminum and burning fuel. No parachute emerged. Unger was 19 years old, had 47 hours in type, and had been told in his final briefing that American fighters lacked the range to escort bombers to Berlin. He died still believing that intelligence assessment, never understanding that German assumptions about fighter design had been rendered obsolete by American engineering. Baer pulled his FW-190 into a climbing turn, simultaneously scanning for threats and calculating odds. 400 Luftwaffe fighters had been scrambled to defend Berlin. Against 658 bombers and their escort, the numbers should favor interception. But the American fighters weren't staying with the bombers. They were hunting aggressively, pursuing German fighters across the sky, following them as they attempted to break contact, maintaining engagement long after any previous American fighter would have turned back to conserve fuel. 3 more German aircraft fell in as many minutes. The exchange ratio was catastrophic. If American fighters could reach Berlin and fight for extended periods over the target, then nowhere in the Reich was safe. The mathematics were inescapable. 658 bombers meant approximately 6,000 tons of bombs delivered to German industry. But the deeper strategic reality was more devastating. The Americans had solved the fundamental problem of strategic bombing, fighter escort to maximum range. Every target in Germany could now be reached by bombers, protected by fighters that matched or exceeded German interceptor performance. The defensive strategy the Luftwaffe had developed over 4 years, allowing short-range Allied fighters to turn back, then attacking unescorted bombers with concentrated force, had been invalidated in a single technological leap. German fighters must now fight through American escort all the way to the bombers, then fight through again on egress, against fighters that wouldn't run out of fuel, against pilots who wouldn't break off to preserve range, against an enemy who had rewritten the rules of air warfare through engineering rather than tactics. As Baer dove away from a pursuing Mustang that shouldn't have been there, couldn't have been there according to every intelligence estimate he'd received, his mind processed the implications with the brutal clarity combat experience provides. If they can reach Berlin, they can reach anywhere. Munich, Hamburg, Schweinfurt, the Ruhr, Messerschmitt production facilities, oil refineries, ball-bearing plants. Nothing remained beyond their reach. The Luftwaffe had spent 5 years building an air defense system predicated on the assumption that Germany's geographic depth provided sanctuary. That assumption died over Berlin on March 6, 1944. Below him, Berlin burned. Above him, silver American fighters circled with impunity. Around him, German pilots died in numbers not seen since the Battle of Britain. The transformation from dismissive confidence, just another American fighter, to existential terror had taken less than 3 months. In December 1943, Luftwaffe intelligence had issued assessments describing the P-51 as possessing similar performance characteristics to existing American types, limited by conventional single-engine fighter range constraints. In March 1944, German pilots were refusing missions rather than face Mustangs over Germany. The collapse was not gradual. It was systematic, mathematical, and irreversible. The silver fighters had come home to Berlin, and they would never leave. The roots of Germany's catastrophe lay not in tactical failure, but in strategic blindness that began years before the first P-51 appeared over Berlin. Segment 1. The Assumption of Invincibility, December 1943. Luftwaffe Intelligence Assessment, BL 443-43, distributed to all fighter commands. The document, recovered from Jagdgeschwader, 3 headquarters after the war, revealed the fatal confidence that preceded collapse. New American fighter designated P-51 observed in limited numbers over Western Europe. Performance assessment, adequate speed and maneuverability at medium altitudes. Range, estimated 400-500 kilometers, consistent with single-engine fighter limitations. Threat classification, moderate. Existing defensive tactics remain effective. No significant tactical adjustments required. Every assumption in that assessment was catastrophically wrong. But Luftwaffe intelligence had reason for confidence. They had faced American fighters for 18 months and found them wanting. The P-38 Lightning was fast but unmaneuverable, vulnerable to head-on attacks that exploited its concentrated cockpit. The P-47 Thunderbolt was tough but couldn't climb with German fighters, couldn't turn with them, and more critically, couldn't escort bombers beyond the Ruhr Valley before turning back for fuel. Major Günther Rahl, third highest scoring ace in the Luftwaffe with 275 victories, flew defensive missions throughout late 1943. His assessment of American fighters, recorded in his combat diary, reflected the prevailing view. The Americans build excellent bombers but mediocre fighters. Their P-47s are flying tanks, durable but clumsy. Their P-38s are fast in a straight line but helpless in a turning fight. Neither aircraft has sufficient range to escort bombers to targets in central Germany. Our tactic is simple. Avoid engagement until the escorts turn back, then attack the undefended bombers. We lose some fighters to escort battles, but the exchange favors us. The bombers are what matter, and bombers without escorts are helpless. This assessment was mathematically sound, based on existing American fighters. A P-47 Thunderbolt carrying drop tanks could reach approximately 280 miles from base, enough to escort bombers to targets in the Ruhr, but no farther. A P-38 Lightning had slightly better range but suffered mechanical reliability problems that kept many aircraft grounded. The gap between maximum Allied fighter range and the location of Germany's critical industries, ball-bearing plants in Schweinfurt, aircraft factories in Regensburg, oil refineries in Leuna, represented a sanctuary where German defenders could operate without fighter interference. The Americans were about to eliminate that sanctuary entirely. Segment 2. The Bureaucratic Accident That Changed Everything, April 1940, London. A meeting that would determine the air war's outcome occurred in a nondescript office building, and nobody present understood its significance. Sir Henry Self, head of the British Purchasing Commission, faced an impossible task. Britain desperately needed fighters. British factories were producing Spitfires and Hurricanes at maximum capacity, but RAF planners projected losses that would exceed production by 30% once serious combat began. The Commission needed to order fighters from American manufacturers immediately, but every American design available was inferior to existing British aircraft. The Curtiss P-40 Warhawk couldn't climb above 15,000 feet effectively. The Bell P-39 Airacobra was fast at low altitude, but useless in high-altitude combat, where German fighters operated. The Republic P-43 Lancer was underpowered and underarmed. None could match Luftwaffe fighters, and ordering them would waste precious dollars on obsolete equipment. Then, North American Aviation, a company that had never designed a fighter, submitted an unsolicited proposal. Company President James Dutch Kindleberger promised to design and build a fighter superior to anything currently flying, and deliver the first prototype in 120 days. The British Purchasing Commission's reaction ranged from skepticism to outright mockery, but they had no better options. On April 24, 1940, they signed a contract for 320 aircraft of a design that existed only on paper. The fighter would be called Mustang. What nobody realized was that this bureaucratic gamble would produce the weapon that would destroy the Luftwaffe. The design team, led by Chief Engineer Edgar Schmude, worked obsessively through spring and summer 1940. Schmude was a German immigrant who had fled the Nazi regime. He understood Luftwaffe aircraft intimately and designed the Mustang specifically to counter German advantages. The NA-73X prototype first flew on October 26, 1940, 102 days after contract signing, beating the 120-day promise. Test pilot Vance Breeze filed a report after the first flight. This airplane has no vices. It's fast, it's stable, it's responsive. The visibility is excellent. The controls are perfectly harmonized. It is, quite simply, the best fighter I have ever flown. But the Mustang had one critical flaw: its engine. The Allison V1710 produced 150 horsepower at sea level, but lost performance dramatically above 15,000 feet. Since aerial combat over Europe occurred at 20,000, 30,000 feet, this limitation made the Mustang nearly useless as a high-altitude fighter. The RAF received their first Mustangs in November 1941 and relegated them to low-altitude reconnaissance. American pilots dismissed it as too slow for real combat. The marriage that changed history occurred through another accident. Ronald Harker, a Rolls-Royce test pilot, flew an Allison-powered Mustang at Boscombe Down in April 1942. He immediately recognized what everyone else had missed. The Mustang's aerodynamically clean airframe combined with a proper high-altitude engine would create something extraordinary. His report was unequivocal. Put a Merlin in the Mustang, the result will be the best fighter of the war. The first Merlin Mustang flew on October 13, 1942. When test pilot Harker opened the throttle at 20,000 feet, the aircraft accelerated past 420 miles, faster than any fighter in service. It climbed to 30,000 feet in under 6 minutes. It maintained full control authority at altitudes where other fighters struggled. Harker's report read like science fiction. The Merlin Mustang is approximately 50 miles faster than the Spitfire 9 at all altitudes above 20,000 feet. If this airplane can be produced in quantity, it will achieve air superiority over Europe. But the real revolution wasn't speed, it was range. The Mustang's laminar flow wing created exceptionally low drag. Combined with 85-gallon fuel tanks in the fuselage and 2 110-gallon drop tanks under the wings, the Merlin Mustang could carry 489 gallons of fuel, nearly twice a P-47's capacity. A P-51B could fly from England to Berlin and back 100 miles, while retaining fuel for 30-45 minutes of combat. This changed everything. The sanctuary where German fighters had operated beyond Allied escort range was about to disappear. Segment 3. Contempt preceding catastrophe. December 13, 1943. The first large-scale Mustang mission. 49 P-51Bs from the 354th Fighter Group escorted bombers to Kiel, 300 miles into Germany. Luftwaffe fighters engaged cautiously, testing the new American fighter. What they discovered shocked them. The Mustangs were fast, climbed well, turned tightly, and showed no signs of fuel shortage despite the distance from England. Several Bf-109s were shot down. No Mustangs were lost. Oberleutnant Heinz Knoke, commanding officer of the Cercle JG-1, filed a combat report expressing bewilderment. The new American fighter is unlike previous types. It matches our aircraft in climb, exceeds us in speed above 20,000 feet, and turns as tightly as a Bf-109. Most disturbing, they showed no concern about fuel reserves despite operating 300 kilometers from their bases. If this aircraft has the range, intelligence suggests we face a serious problem. Intelligence analysts dismissed Knoke's concerns. Long-range fighter escort was theoretically impossible. The fuel-weight performance equation didn't allow it. Either the Mustangs Knoke encountered were operating near maximum range and would turn back soon, or he had overestimated the distance. The alternative, that American engineers had actually solved the range problem, seemed too unlikely to credit. Hauptmann Wilhelm Herget, a 72 Victory Ace flying with JG-26, encountered Mustangs over Osnabrück on December 20th. His assessment, recorded in the unit war diary, reflected the prevailing contempt. Engaged 4 of the new American fighters. They are fast and handle well, but nothing we haven't dealt with before. Shot one down with a deflection shot from 200 meters. The pilot was inexperienced. He tried to turn with my FW-190 at low altitude where we hold advantage. Given time, these Mustangs will prove as vulnerable as P-47s once we learn their weaknesses. I am not concerned. Herget would be dead within 3 months, shot down by Mustangs over Brunswick on March 22, 1944. The contempt extended to the highest levels of command. General Lieutenant Adolf Galland, commander of the Luftwaffe fighter arm, reviewed intelligence reports on the P-51 with professional interest, but no alarm. Germany had seen multiple American fighter types enter service. Each had proven beatable. The P-51 appeared to be just another American design, competent, well-built, but nothing revolutionary. This assessment represented the fatal blindness of experience. Luftwaffe pilots had spent 4 years defeating enemies through superior aircraft performance and superior pilot skill. They had defeated the RAF over France. They had fought the Soviet Air Force to a standstill. They had learned to counter P-47s and P-38s through tactics that exploited those aircraft's weaknesses. Their confidence was earned through victory after victory. What they failed to understand was that the P-51 Mustang didn't just represent incremental improvement. It represented a paradigm shift that invalidated their entire defensive strategy. Segment 4. The Mathematics of Annihilation. March 4th through March 8th, 1944. Big week. The 8th Air Force launched over 3,000 bomber sorties, supported by nearly 1,000 fighter sorties across 5 days, targeting German aircraft production. Among the escort fighters, P-51 Mustangs flew deeper into Germany than any Allied fighter had previously penetrated. What followed shattered Luftwaffe confidence completely. On March 6th, the date of Major Heinsberg's encounter over Berlin, 658 bombers escorted by 800 fighters struck the German capital. Of those fighters, 174 were P-51 Mustangs from 3 fighter groups. They arrived over Berlin with full ammunition and sufficient fuel for extended combat. The Luftwaffe scrambled over 400 fighters from units across northern Germany. The results were systematic destruction. The Mustangs didn't merely escort bombers. They hunted aggressively, pursuing German fighters across the sky, following them to their airfields, strafing aircraft attempting to land. 354th Fighter Group claimed 15 German aircraft destroyed in aerial combat, 23 destroyed on the ground, lost 2 P-51s. 357th Fighter Group claimed 20 German aircraft destroyed in combat, 17 destroyed on the ground, lost 1 P-51. 4th Fighter Group claimed 18 German aircraft destroyed in combat, 11 destroyed on the ground, lost 3 P-51s. The exchange ratio was devastating. 110-plus German aircraft destroyed for 6 American fighters lost, nearly 20.1 in the Americans' favor. Lieutenant Klaus Faber of JG-26, shot down and captured on March 8th, told interrogators what German pilots were experiencing. We used to know that American fighters would turn back after reaching their range limit. We could wait them out, attack after they left. Now they never leave. They follow us to our bases. They strafe us while we're landing. They wait above our airfields for us to take off, then shoot us down before we gain altitude. It's impossible to fight them. They're everywhere, and they have unlimited fuel. The psychological impact proved as devastating as physical losses. German fighter pilots had been told the P-51 was just another American fighter, with conventional range limitations. Instead, they encountered an aircraft that could reach any target in Germany, that would not turn back, that could fight indefinitely. The certainty that had sustained Luftwaffe morale, that German airspace provided sanctuary where damaged fighters could recover, was shattered. General Major Adolf Galland flew a combat mission on March 8th, personally assessing the Mustang threat. His report to Reichsmarschall Hermann Göring marked the moment German leadership acknowledged reality. The P-51 has changed the fundamental equation of the air war. We can no longer defend German airspace. The enemy has fighters that match our performance, exceed our range by factors we cannot counter, and outnumber us increasingly as our losses mount. Production must be tripled immediately, and we must develop counters to their range advantage. If we do not, the war is lost in the air. Göring's response revealed the bankruptcy of German strategic thinking. Then get our jets operational immediately. The Me-262 will sweep these Mustangs from the sky. But the Messerschmitt Ma-262 jet fighter remained months away from operational deployment, plagued by engine problems and Hitler's insistence it be developed as a bomber rather than fighter. By the time German jets entered service in meaningful numbers, the Luftwaffe would be a broken force. Segment 5. The transformation through pilot testimony. The collapse of German pilot morale can be tracked through their own words, preserved in diaries, letters, and interrogation reports. February 1944. Unteroffizier Joseph Wurmheller, JG2, writing in his personal diary. The Americans have introduced a new fighter called Mustang. Intelligence says it's another P-47 type. We shall see. I'm not concerned. We have dealt with everything they've sent so far. March 1944. Same pilot. The Mustang is not like the P-47. It's faster at altitude, more maneuverable, and apparently has unlimited range. We lost 4 pilots yesterday to Mustangs over Munich. They followed us from the bomber stream to our airfield. One circled for 20 minutes, waiting for us to land, then shot down Lieutenant Becker on his landing approach. This is not honorable combat. This is execution. April 1944. Same pilot. I have not flown in 3 days. There are no aircraft available. The Americans destroy our fighters faster than we can replace them. When we do fly, Mustangs are always present. They own the sky. We are merely targets. I do not expect to survive the month. Wurmheller was killed in action on April 23, 1944, shot down by P-51s over Salzburg. He was 23 years old, had 102 confirmed victories, and died still struggling to understand how American engineering had rendered his skill and courage irrelevant. Hauptmann Hermann Graf, one of Germany's highest-scoring aces with 212 confirmed victories, most earned on the Eastern Front, transferred to JG-11 defending Germany in March 1944. His experience summarized the transformation every German pilot underwent. Fighting the Soviets, I felt like a hunter. We had superior aircraft, superior training, superior tactics. Every mission was an opportunity for victory. Fighting the Americans with their Mustangs, I felt like prey. They were everywhere. You couldn't escape them. You couldn't outrun them. You couldn't outlast them. Every mission became a question not of, will I shoot down enemies, but will I survive to land? The psychological reversal was complete and devastating. Major Walter Nowotny, 258 victory ace and holder of the Knight's Cross with oak leaves, swords and diamonds, flew defensive missions over Germany in summer 1944 before transitioning to Me-262 jets. His assessment, recorded in a letter to his brother, captured the despair of German fighter pilots. We are losing this war in the air, and there is nothing we can do to prevent it. The Americans have solved every problem we thought insurmountable. They have fighters that go everywhere our fighters go, and farther. They have pilot training programs that replace losses faster than we can inflict them. They have industrial production that builds aircraft faster than we can destroy them. Most critically, they have fuel, and we increasingly do not. I watch my best pilots die in aircraft that sit grounded half the time for lack of aviation fuel. The Mustang didn't just defeat us tactically. It revealed that we had already lost strategically, and we were too blind to see it. Nowotny was killed on November 8, 1944, shot down in his Me-262 jet by P-51s during landing approach. The same tactic Mustang. Pilots had perfected through months of hunting German fighters back to their bases. Oberst Johannes Steinhoff, who commanded JG-77 and survived the war, provided the most comprehensive analysis of what German pilots experienced. The P-51 represented the perfect convergence of everything we lacked. It had range we couldn't match because our fighters were designed for short-range interception over Germany. It had performance we couldn't exceed because we had spent resources developing specialized interceptors rather than versatile fighters. It had reliability we couldn't achieve because our industry was being bombed systematically by the very aircraft the Mustangs protected. Most devastatingly, it had numbers we could never counter. By mid-1944, we faced Mustang groups everywhere, over Berlin, over Munich, over the Ruhr, over our airfields, over our factories. They were ubiquitous, relentless and growing stronger while we grew weaker. That was the mathematics of our defeat. Segment 6. Engineering superiority versus fighting spirit. The P-51's dominance stemmed from specific engineering decisions that gave it advantages no German fighter could match. The laminar flow wing reduced drag by 15–20% compared to conventional designs, translating directly into greater speed and range. German fighters used conventional wings because laminar flow designs required extraordinarily precise manufacturing, tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. German industry, overtaxed and suffering from Allied bombing, couldn't achieve such precision in mass production. The Packard 5-1650 Merlin engine was the finest aircraft engine of World War II. Its two-stage supercharger maintained power to 30,000 feet. German engines, the Daimler-Benz DB605 in the Bf109 and the BMW 801 in the FW190, used single-stage superchargers that lost power rapidly above 20,000 feet. In combat, this meant Mustangs held both speed and climb advantages at the altitudes where interception occurred. Internal fuel capacity gave the P-51B 184 gallons internally, 30% more than a Bf109G and 45% more than an FW190A. Combined with drop tanks, the Mustang could carry 489 gallons total, enough for 2,080 miles range at cruise speed. This wasn't just an advantage, it was a paradigm shift that invalidated German defensive strategy. Structural strength meant the P-51 could absorb battle damage that would destroy lighter German fighters. Combat reports document P-51s returning from missions with multiple cannon strikes, large sections of wing or tail surfaces missing, and major structural damage, yet still flying. German fighters, optimized for weight savings and maneuverability, couldn't sustain such punishment. Armament of 650 caliber M2 Browning machine guns with 1,980 rounds total provided devastating firepower, while German fighters typically mounted cannons with superior hitting power per shot. They carried far less ammunition, typically 100 to 200 rounds total. In practical terms, P-51 pilots could engage multiple targets and fire longer bursts, while German pilots had to make every shot count or run out of ammunition mid-combat. Visibility from the bubble canopy, introduced on the P-51D variant, provided 360-degree visibility. German fighters used razorback designs with heavy framing that created blind spots. In air combat, seeing the enemy first often determined survival. The P-51 pilot could see threats that German pilots couldn't detect until too late. These engineering advantages combined to create an aircraft that German fighters couldn't counter through tactics alone. Luftwaffe pilots tried everything, attacking from below where P-51s had slight disadvantage, forcing turning fights at low altitude, using cloud cover for surprise attacks, coordinating multiple fighters to overwhelm single Mustangs. Some tactics worked occasionally. None worked consistently. The engineering superiority was too overwhelming. Segment 7. The human cost of industrial failure. By summer 1944, the Luftwaffe faced a crisis that transcended tactical defeat. They were running out of fuel. Allied bombing of German synthetic fuel plants, combined with loss of Romanian oil fields to Soviet advance, reduced aviation fuel production by 90%. Even when aircraft were available, they often sat grounded for lack of fuel. P-51 Mustangs played a direct role in this fuel crisis. Long-range escort missions increasingly included secondary objectives, strafing attacks against German airfields, oil installations, and transportation networks. Mustang pilots, having escorted bombers and engaged defending fighters, would descend to low altitude on return flights and attack targets of opportunity. Lieutenant Colonel John C. Meyer, commanding officer of the 302nd Fighter Group, described the tactic. After escorting bombers and clearing the sky of German fighters, we'd come down on the deck and shoot up anything we saw: trains, trucks, airfields, oil tanks. The Mustang was perfect for this. Fast enough to evade ground fire, rugged enough to absorb battle damage, and with enough ammunition to engage multiple targets. We'd often strafe 2 or 3 airfields on a single mission. On April 24, 1944, Mustangs from multiple fighter groups coordinated attacks against Luftwaffe airfields across southern Germany, destroying over 300 German aircraft on the ground in a single day, more than the Luftwaffe could produce in a week. The attacks continued through spring and summer, systematically destroying German aircraft before they could challenge bomber streams. General Major Adolf Galland attempted desperate countermeasures. He ordered fighters dispersed to small auxiliary airfields where they would be harder to locate. Americans simply searched more thoroughly and found them anyway. He ordered fighters to remain on alert at runway ends with engines running, ready for immediate takeoff when bombers approached. Mustang pilots began strafing aircraft during takeoff when they were most vulnerable. He ordered all fighters kept in armored shelters between missions. Americans destroyed the shelters with bombs and rockets. Nothing worked. The Luftwaffe was being systematically annihilated, and the P-51 Mustang was the primary instrument of that annihilation. The statistics tracked the collapse with brutal clarity. January 1944, Luftwaffe, operational strength, Mount 650 single-engine fighters. Monthly losses, 1,311. P-51s in service, minimal. June 1944, operational strength, 1,450 single-engine fighters, despite constant production. Monthly losses, 2,442. P-51s in service, 900 plus. December 1944, operational strength, 980 single-engine fighters. Monthly losses, 2,200 plus. P-51s in service, 1,200 plus. The trend was irreversible, despite producing over 30,000 single-engine fighters in 1944. German operational strength declined because losses exceeded production plus pilot training capacity. The Luftwaffe was being consumed by attrition it couldn't sustain. More critically, Luftwaffe pilot casualties reached unsustainable levels. Germany was losing experienced fighter pilots faster than training schools could produce replacements. The median experience level of German fighter pilots dropped from 200 flight hours in January 1944 to 110 flight hours by June 1944. Many replacement pilots arrived at operational units with less than 30 hours in their assigned fighter type, barely enough to know how to start the engine and take off. Never mind engage experienced American pilots flying superior aircraft. Obergefreiter Hans-Joachim Marseille, a mechanic with JG-53, described what he witnessed at his unit's airfield in summer 1944. New pilots arrived every week looking younger each time. Boys, basically. 18, 19 years old, with perhaps 50 hours total flying time. We'd watch them take off on their first mission. Often they'd die that same day, shot down by Americans before they learned where the gun button was located. The experienced pilots who survived refused to fly with them because the novices were more dangerous to their own formation than to the enemy. But we had no choice. The veterans were dying faster than we could count, and these boys were all that remained. I watched the Luftwaffe collapse not through lack of aircraft or lack of courage, but through lack of time to train pilots properly. The Americans, meanwhile, sent us pilots with 200 hours of training who flew like veterans from their first mission. Segment 8. The final accounting, why Germany lost the air war. The defeat of the Luftwaffe fighter arm represents one of the most decisive technological and industrial victories of World War II. Understanding why Germany lost requires examining factors that converge to create inevitable defeat. First, the mathematics of production. Germany never possessed sufficient aircraft construction capacity to wage successful war of attrition. In 1942, at peak U-boat construction, German yards completed 237 submarines. Allied forces sank 87 that year, a replacement rate that appeared sustainable. But those 237 new submarines required 9,000 skilled workers, 75,000 tons of specialized steel, 12,000 diesel engines and electric motors, and supply chains already strained by aircraft, tank, and ammunition production. Meanwhile, the United States alone was producing escort carriers, destroyers, destroyer escorts, and patrol craft at rates that completely overwhelmed German submarine numbers. In 1943, American shipyards completed 50 escort carriers, 128 destroyer escorts, 67 destroyers, and hundreds of submarine chasers and patrol vessels. The same mathematics applied to fighters. German factories produced approximately 25,000 single-engine fighters in 1944. American factories produced over 38,000 fighters that same year, and these were just the fighters sent to Europe, not counting aircraft deployed to the Pacific theater. The production disparity was insurmountable. Furthermore, American yards were completing Liberty ships and tankers faster than U-boats could sink them. In 1942, U-boats sank approximately 6 million tons of Allied shipping. American, British, and Canadian yards built 7 million tons of replacement shipping that same year. By 1943, new construction exceeded losses by 3.1 ratios. Even if U-boats had maintained their 1942 success rates, which Allied countermeasures made impossible, they couldn't sink ships faster than Allied yards replaced them. The same principle applied to fighters. American factories replaced P-51 losses within days. German factories needed weeks or months to replace Bf-109s and FW-90s and lacked the fuel to fly them once built. Second, the engineering gap. German engineering focused on incremental improvements to existing designs rather than revolutionary changes. The Type 7 and Type 1 submarines that formed the operational fleet backbone in 1943 were fundamentally similar to 1936 designs. They were excellent by 1939 standards, but increasingly obsolete as Allied countermeasures evolved. Germany did develop revolutionary technology, the Type 51 U-boat with streamlined hull, massive battery capacity, and snorkel breathing apparatus. The Type 51 could outrun escorts while submerged and remain underwater indefinitely. But it entered service in April 1945, far too late to affect the war's outcome. Only 2 became operational before Germany surrendered, neither achieving combat success. The same pattern applied to fighters. Germany developed the Me-262 jet fighter, which could outrun any Allied aircraft. But it entered service too late and in too few numbers. By the time Me-262s flew operationally in meaningful numbers, the Luftwaffe lacked experienced pilots to fly them and fuel to operate them. The revolutionary technology that might have changed the war arrived when the war was already lost. Meanwhile, Allied technology evolved in real time. 1940 radar became 1941 centimetric radar, became 1942 airborne radar, became 1943 radar that German aircraft couldn't detect. Each advance was incremental, but accumulated effects were overwhelming. Third, training and experience. The Luftwaffe's greatest asset was experienced crews and commanders who had learned combat tactics through 3 years of continuous operations. Loss of these veterans proved irreplaceable. By mid-1943, median experience among Luftwaffe fighter pilots had dropped from 8 patrols to 2 patrols. Green commanders made mistakes veterans avoided. Training schools couldn't compensate. The curriculum that produced successful commanders of 1940 required 18 months from recruitment to combat-ready crew. By 1943, replacement demands forced reducing training to 8 months, then 6 months. Crews arrived at operational flotillas barely competent in basic operations, never mind combat tactics. They were sent into battle against opponents with sophisticated detection equipment, overwhelming numbers, and systematic tactics refined through years of hard-won experience. The Allies faced no similar crisis. Their training programs expanded rather than contracted. British, Canadian, and American escort crews completed increasingly sophisticated training, including realistic exercises. Allied crews improved steadily, while German crews deteriorated, a mathematical trend guaranteeing defeat. Fourth, strategic blindness. Luftwaffe leadership never accepted that Allied advantages, industrial capacity, technological sophistication, intelligence superiority, were permanent rather than temporary. They kept promising crews that new weapons, new tactics, and new technologies would restore German dominance. These promises proved false. Allied advantages weren't accidents or temporary circumstances, but structural realities reflecting superior industrial and scientific capabilities. The P-51 Mustang embodied this reality. It wasn't just a better fighter. It was proof that American engineering and industry could solve problems German engineering and industry couldn't match. The laminar flow wing required manufacturing precision German factories couldn't achieve under wartime conditions. The Merlin engine represented sophistication German engine manufacturers couldn't replicate. The production numbers, 15,586 P-51s built during the war, demonstrated industrial capacity Germany never possessed. General Lieutenant Werner Kreiper, who served as Chief of Staff of the Luftwaffe in 1944, wrote in his post-war analysis, "The P-51 Mustang destroyed the Luftwaffe, not through superior pilots or tactics, though both were excellent, but through systematic application of overwhelming advantage. It could go anywhere we could go, and go farther. It could fight as well as our best fighters, and fight longer. It was produced in numbers we could not match. The combination was unsurvivable. We dismissed it initially as just another American fighter, limited by the same range constraints that limited all single-engine fighters. By the time we realized our error, it was too late. The P-51 had already won the air war." Segment 9. The Final Reckoning, September 1944. General Major Adolf Galland received orders from Göring to eliminate the American fighter threat. The Reichsmarschalls seemed to believe willpower could overcome material disadvantage. Galland's response, preserved in his memoir published in 1953, captured the despair of the Luftwaffe's situation. Eliminate them with what? They outnumber us 5-1. Their aircraft are superior to ours at the altitudes where combat occurs. Their pilots are well-trained and growing more experienced, while ours are increasingly inexperienced and desperate. They have unlimited fuel while we ration every leader. They can replace their losses in days while our replacements take months to produce. There is no military solution to the American fighters. They have won through superior resources and superior engineering. We lost this war the moment the P-51 Mustang entered service in numbers we couldn't counter. The statistics tell the story of the P-51's impact with brutal clarity. Total P-51s built, 15,586 destroyed in combat, 2,520 air-to-air victories, 4,950, highest of any Allied fighter in Europe. Ground victories, 4,131, loss ratio, 196.1, nearly 2 German aircraft destroyed for every P-51 lost. Individual Mustang aces achieved victory totals that would have been unthinkable earlier in the war. Major George Preddy, 2683 victories. Captain Don Gentile, 2183 victories. Major John C. Meyer, 24 victories. These men weren't superhuman. They were competent pilots in superior aircraft, facing increasingly desperate opponents in inferior machines. By April 1945, the Luftwaffe fighter arm had effectively ceased to exist as a coherent force. Fuel shortages grounded most remaining aircraft. The few that flew faced such overwhelming American numerical superiority, often 10 to 15 Mustangs for every German fighter, that survival exceeded mission completion in priority. German pilots, who had once dismissed the P-51 as just another fighter, now refused missions rather than face near certain death against aircraft they could no longer counter. Synthesis. The transformation complete. December 1943 to May 1945. From contempt to annihilation in 18 months. When the first P-51B Mustangs arrived at 8th Air Force bases in England in December 1943, Luftwaffe Intelligence Assessment BL 4443 dismissed them. New American fighter designated P-51, performance adequate, range, conventional single-engine limitations, threat classification, moderate, no tactical adjustments required. 3 months later, March 6, 1944, silver Mustangs circled over Berlin, 50 miles from their English bases, hunting German fighters with impunity. The exchange ratio that day, 110 plus German aircraft destroyed for 6 P-51s lost. 15 months after Berlin, April 1945, the Luftwaffe fighter arm had ceased to exist as a coherent force. German pilots who had dismissed the P-51 as just another fighter now refused missions rather than face certain death against aircraft they could no longer counter. The final statistics, written in blood: P-51 Mustang, 15,586 built, 2,520 lost in combat, 4,150 air victories, 431 ground victories. Loss ratio, 1.86.1. Luftwaffe collapse, January 1944, 1,050 operational fighters. December 1944, 980 operational fighters, despite producing 30,000 replacements. Monthly losses exceeded 2,200 aircraft. Pilot experience dropped from 200 hours to 110 hours. The mathematics were irreversible. The lesson: Engineering versus Courage, May 8, 1945. Bodney Airfield, England. Captain Don Blakesley stood beside his P-51D Hun Hunter. When asked what made the difference, his answer was immediate. The P-51. Simple as that. Before Mustangs, we escorted to the border and turned back. After Mustangs, we escorted to Berlin and back. The Luftwaffe stopped showing up because we killed them faster than they could train replacements. General Lieutenant Werner Kreiper, Luftwaffe Chief of Staff, confirmed this in his post-war analysis. The P-51 destroyed the Luftwaffe through systematic application of overwhelming advantage. It could go anywhere we could go, and farther. It was produced in numbers we could not match. We dismissed it as just another American fighter. By the time we realized our error, it was too late. The final truth. The P-51 Mustang proved that industrial wars are won not through courage and skill alone, but through engineering excellence and industrial capacity. Germany had brave pilots and effective tactics. America had those plus superior aircraft produced in overwhelming numbers by an industrial base Germany could never match. The transformation from just another fighter to instrument of annihilation took exactly 3 months. The defensive strategy the Luftwaffe had developed over 4 years, allowing short-range escorts to turn back, then attacking unescorted bombers, was invalidated on March 6, 1944, when P-51s appeared over Berlin and would not leave. Major Heinz Baer, 204 Victory Ace who survived the war, reflected in 1977, "I knew instantly, watching them circle over Berlin, that we had lost the air war. They were there, 550 miles from England, with fuel to fight and fuel to return home. That should have been impossible. The fact that it wasn't meant every assumption we'd made was wrong. The Mustang proved we'd already lost strategically, and we'd been too blind to see it." The silver fighter with the checkered nose had become the instrument of the Luftwaffe's destruction. Proof that in industrial warfare, the side with better factories wins, the side with better engineering wins, the side that can solve technical problems the enemy can't acknowledge wins. Germany's pilots were brave. Germany's tactics were sound. Germany's aircraft were excellent by 1939 standards. None of it mattered because America had built and saw aircraft that made 1939 standards obsolete and produced it in numbers that made German resistance mathematically futile. The German pilots who survived would spend decades remembering the moment they first realized the truth. The P-51 wasn't just another fighter. It was the fighter that destroyed them, one mission at a time. until nothing remained but memories and the haunting sound of 650 caliber machine guns converging in the sky above their homeland. The mathematics of annihilation, written not in strategic plans, but in the winter sky over Berlin, where silver American fighters circled with impunity on March 6, 1944, proving that every assumption the Luftwaffe held about air warfare had been catastrophically, irreversibly, fatally wrong.